before moving on, jumping into questions, I'd like to introduce our lead discussant, Paul Carter, who is currently serving as Senior State Department Advisor at the U.S. Helsinki Commission. We'll be losing Paul in just a few short days. He will be headed off to be the Director for Eurasia at the Assistance Office of the European Bureau at the State Department. It's been a great year with Paul, and he's really been an incredible asset to the Commission. Paul has served a number of interesting postings. Most relevant for our discussion here today is his service at Embassy Moscow, as well also service at the Department of State on the Ukraine desk, and even reaching back further into the past, in the mid-'80s. Paul was an exchange student, one of two American political scientists studying at Moscow State University, I believe in 1985-86, where Paul began work that ended up in a book published on the ideology of Suslov. So Paul is uniquely credentialed to help kick off our discussion today as something of a lead discussant. Paul, we'll take it over from here.
Thank you very much, Kyle. It is really an honor to be here with David for the showing of his film. What year was the film made, David?
Well, 2006 until 2011.
You know, I think it's a fascinating film. I think it really captures the sadness, the sometimes horror, and the kind of always surreal quality of life in the Soviet Union. As Kyle mentioned, I was an IREX exchange scholar in '85, '86. Lived at MGO, the Stalin scraper there in Moscow, and lived with the Soviet students and our other exchange scholars. And I always thought that in so many ways that after I left, that if you never lived in the Soviet Union or in a communist country, it's not something you can really fully understand. It's something you have to live through to see what it's about. Now, David's film today, of course, offers us a glimpse into that, and many people who testify and speak from the heart and from their own experience about what life was like. And, he captures it in so many different ways. What's great for me is his approach to the ideology, and to show it from so many different angles. My own academic work also was an approach at this, but from more sort of the top down, I guess. We saw it many times in the film, people talking about the ideology. Marxism-Leninism was, in many ways, a kind of an ersatz religion, and I think we see that captured here. The Soviet Union was what we might call an ideocracy, a system based on the ideology. We never really used to hear that much about that, the model of ideocracy back in the Soviet period when people were studying it in the West. A few scholars touched on this, but it wasn't widely accepted. Partly that was due to the fact that leftist scholars, Marxists, didn't want to accept the USSR as a legitimate version of Marxism. And for others, it was a question of, they focused so much on this question, well, did they believe it or not? Most people would answer, no, they didn't believe it. The real question, though, isn't really, did they believe it or not? Because we don't know what the leadership at the time believed. We don't know what people like Brezhnev and Suslov, when they looked at the mirror at 3 o'clock in the morning, what did they really, what did they say to themselves? Really, more importantly, was the fact of what role did the ideology play? And people, whether they have had an emotional attachment to it or a psychological, the fact is that they had to act as if they believed. And in the end, it was the leadership lost the will to enforce that, to force people to act as if they believed. And my own work, as Kyle said, was on Suslov, the chief ideologist of the party. Suslov died in January of 1982. Brezhnev died in November, the following November, 11 months later. And really, I always argued that the ideology went with him. Suslov was the last kind of enforcer that forced people to act as if they believed in the ideology. After that, Gorbachev came in. Gorbachev began to change the perspective and came up with the idea of reform communism. I think Gorbachev himself was very deeply affected by Chernobyl and the fact that he wasn't getting information at the time. I remember I was in Moscow when Chernobyl went up, and we watched happy pictures on television of Ukrainian farmers plowing the fields and putting in the crop, for a week, even though we were hearing on the shortwave, the cloud of radiation going all over the place. So, and I think that Gorbachev himself was kind of victim of that big lie there and didn't get that information. And that influenced him to introduce the idea of glasnost after, that they had to have a free flow of information. And then the system began to crumble. Molotov, one of Stalin's men, once said that there's reform communism and then there's real communism. There's really no such thing as a reform communism. It can't survive, and it fell apart. And in the end it did. It collapsed, as David showed in the film here. Finally, two quick takeaways from this that I see is, one, as Kevin Close talked about, was the overcoming of the Soviet legacy. Of all the things that the communists did to Russia, the terror, all the people that died, what they did to the economy, all these things. The one lasting thing really was, I think, was the moral decay of the society. I mean, they taught that there is no God, there is no religion, there is no morality other than what the party says. And eventually that just deteriorated into every person must kill, lie, cheat, steal, whatever, to get along. And that legacy is very hard to overcome. I mean, that survives for many, many years. And eventually, Russia has really not had an accounting of that, sort of a real laying bare of the Soviet past. And we still see people today that praise Stalin or look back with nostalgia on the Soviet era without having a real accounting for what happened. But also another lesson, I guess, is not only for Russia and for itself to come to terms with these things, but also a lesson for the world. And that for me is the danger of ideology and ideological thinking. I really thought that when the Soviet Union collapsed that we would see the end of that kind of ideology and people being subject to that. Well, I think we have, in the sense of the grand systems, like Marxism. But yet, even today in our own society, I think oftentimes people fall into kind of ideological thinking and are quick to rush to judgment on things. And so it's always a lesson, the danger of that. The Russians were no different than anybody else, really, I don't think, in the end. And it could happen anywhere. So it's something that we have to always be on guard against. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over and
Thank you, Paul.
open it up to questions.
Let's open it up. Everybody's sat very patiently, sort of